And we're back the following week. I have since polished all of the external parts of the engine with some rouge on the wheel. This is what they look like. So you'll notice that there's been some further cleaning that has happened. Here's the heads right here. I mean, not too mirror shine, but definitely an improvement over how they had originally looked. Some of it's kind of a mirror. Came out pretty good. And finally, this last piece right here was cleaned up. What we're gonna do first is we're gonna put this seal in this piece. We're basically working in reverse order. And I have this seal right here. And to do this, I'm gonna lubricate the inside of this ring. And I found an appropriate size socket. Happens to be 7/8 is a perfect fit. It's a deep well. We'll go over the shaft and we're gonna lightly tap it in. Note that only the inside of the seal was lubricated, not the outside. I want the outside to be dry. I'll place it down over the shaft like that, making sure that everything stays straight and aligned during this entire procedure. I don't want it to go off kilter. The 7/8 will fit perfectly over it. I'll make sure it stays straight, and then I will tap it in. Now I've got the seal in, and I'm going to assemble the rest of the disengagement device here on top of it. First thing we do is we're going to drop in the spring. Make sure that's fully seated. I imagine we can place the bearings just like that for now. Try and find the best way to do this. We're going to lay the sprocket down over it. Just like that, and that should stop the bearings from coming out. Finally, we have this washer. At that point already, I think I could test this, yeah. So there we go. There we go. Well, put this washer over it like this. We have the clip. I have a really bad tool for this right now. We can't find any other tool at the moment, so this is what I got. Make sure that's seated. It is seated. Then we have the top cap, and that needs to go in with this retainer pin right here. But it also needs to go through that machine. There's a machined hole on the side where all of this comes together. I went and hammered that peg through, and this is what we have as a result now. You can see that the gear is free spinning on the shaft. And if I go and release it so it comes up, it is now engaged with the gear in the back. We're gonna flip the same piece around and install the next seal right here. This one will use a 13/16. There we go. We're gonna press a new seal in this piece. This one shouldn't be too difficult. Now the new seal is installed in this piece. This is now done. We're going to reassemble these two components back together. I'm going to remove these screws now. To make this easier, I'm just going to cool this down in the freezer for a bit so that it seats easy. Just off camera, I have a heat gun situated blowing air through the bearing, and I mean far away. I'm only trying to get this up to about 120, 130 degrees. That's it. I'm not trying to melt anything down here. I just don't want it cold when I press this together. So it's sitting there, the heat gun is mounted, and I could just let it sit there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever. While this is going on, I've got the gasket on the table. I'm going to be cleaning up the mating surfaces as this is going to be gasketed. It's nice and hot, it'll dry quick too. These have already been washed. I just want to get the residue off, any residue that's been on here. That's worth doing again. Yeah, much better. I do the same thing with this side, get off any oil residue, and then I'll hit it with some carb cleaner. Make sure all the residue is gone. Put the gasket on. Yeah, fits like a glove.
There you go.
Okay, very good. Let's see what we can do. Yeah, that didn't go. Get on the press. Finish that up. I'll get a couple screws through there though to make sure the gasket stays aligned. Got everything pressed back together pretty much and brought it home by progressively turning the screws in a star configuration. I'll point out that as this was done using this tool every now and again to make sure that the inside of the seal was seating properly. I can't do this with one hand, obviously, but you go around inside the seal and make sure that it was seated nicely to the shaft here. And now I have a really nice closed gasketed, not torqued to specification yet. There's one more thing I want to do now that this is done, and that is to remove each screw one at a time, add the blue Loctite to it, put the screws back in, and then do the final torquing. All the screws have Loctite in them now. The book provides no specification. I'll use my own judgment. That's it. Cooking up the gear for lunch.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. No.
No?
No.
Put it back on now.
I ended up using the press to get this on. Had to stage it quite elaborately to do so without damaging the engine. It turned out to be for the best though, and it's seated properly. That's what I went with. We're going to install the gear with the needle bearings. So we're going to do that now. It starts with this washer. It simply goes around the shaft here. Cleaned everything up, and we'll begin. I'm going to use some red grease to hold the needle bearings in place here as I pack them in. I've got all the needles loaded, held in place by grease. I'll carefully try and get it over the shaft in a position without moving any of them, I hope. I gently push them up towards the top where they seat. There is a flange up top to stop them from moving forward.
And we had to get all the lifts wired, we had to get everything safe.
Able to lower the bearing down, and everything fits just fine. Again, moving more of the excess grease. In the first movie, I mistakenly called this a crankcase cover. I hadn't been under it, admittedly, a transmission cover. And this is the next step. We're just going to put this back on now. We're done under there. Going to give both surfaces a proper cleaning. Going to give both surfaces a proper cleaning. The gasketed surfaces one last time before we get underway with some carb cleaner. The gasket is keyed right here, so we could place it like that. There's also a key on this side as well. We could get this through to hold everything in place as we tighten everything down. So I'll just bring it through like that. And what I'd like to do is get some screws in just to keep everything stable as we tighten it down, because there's a bearing race that everything sits through, remembering how hard it was to take off initially. There we go, it's starting to seat now. Yeah, I could probably bring this down with progressively with screws. Look at that. It is starting to look like an engine again. I have to take those screws back out and then put Loctite on all of them, put them back in and torque them down. We're going to put the cylinder back on with the associated gasket. I got to give this once over. Also, I got to cut this material here, some of this gasket material. I got to give this a once over. I also got to cut some of this gasket material. It's overlapping, so got a new razor blade, brand new. There we go. Oh, I managed to do it without busting the gasket. Not exactly the most precision fit, but they work. It passes. Now the next goal is to get the cylinder over the piston without breaking any of the rings. I've lined up everything in place so I could work on it in this position, so I can bring it back a little bit, bring this forward so I have some more room to work. That should be fine. Just like that. Unfortunately, I broke the piston ring. I had jumped the notch when I was pressing it in, and that cracked the ring, and I'm going to have to get a new one. That's going to stop me from putting this head on. But through the magic of video editing, basically what I'm going to do this out of order. I'm going to continue working on this engine, and then putting the cylinder and head on is just going to be done last. The next thing we're going to do is install seal number 4. There's a recess right here for a key, and this is keyed to be in a certain position because there are timing marks on here to set this up. I'll install this now. Then that gets screwed in. I'm going to loom this back through this cable into the engine now. I made sure to clean this up before I did. I don't need any grime getting in there. It's seated like this, so I get started. Taking my time. I have to work that grommet back into position up here. There's not much grommet left on this side. I'd probably use some RTV here to seal this up so no water gets in, but that's just fine. Put in the 2 screws that are used to adjust the ignition timing and hold this all in place. Obviously, I'm not setting up the timing now, just getting it together. Before we flip the engine over, I'm going to pop this cover back on and secure it. This will protect this side as I work on the other side so none of these components get damaged. It's a precautionary measure. So work here is complete. We're ready to drop this piece back into the engine. Everything is nice and clean now. And this is keyed, so it only goes in one way. I could see the key right here. And there we go, seated. The clutches are going to go in now. I remember that the number 5s were facing down, and that's how they'll go in. There are some retainer clips that go in as well once the clutches go in, just like that. And then the retainer clip goes through, just like that. We'll do it with the other one now. Now the springs. There we go, that's finished. We install now the 5th and final seal of this project. The next step is to put this piece back on the unit. I'm going to clean this up a little beforehand. This piece is going to be pressed on with a nut, but I don't want to use the nut that came with it because it's unique to the bike. So I used another nut, the same thread. I went and found one, and that's what we're going to use to push this down. If you'll recall from the last movie, this was taken off with a puller. So it's not keyed. Just like that. And then I'll just secure it with the nut. Now we're just going to add these 3 clutches back in, drop them into place, really easy. We go 1, 2, and 3. So now I'm going to put the spring back in around all of the clutches. There we go. Then we're going to put this rubber seal back around here like this. Sits in this recess, just like that. Now we'll place this back on. Been cleaned and polished. Matching the screw holes. We have this lock washer here. Finally the nut. I'll just loosely fit this right here. And now the 3 screws. Just a little dab of Loctite on each screw, just a tiny bit. Now tighten all of them down.
Hey Jason, you want to see an awesome magic trick I learned?
Sure.
I'm going to fix this piston ring.
Fix that piston ring.
Watch this.
You can do it. I got confidence.
Check this out. It's all fixed. Look at that.
Brand new.
Brand new. Cool, let's put it in the engine.
Do it.
I start by checking my ring fitment here in the cylinder, make sure the size is correct. I have been known to screw this up once or twice in my life. So this confirms that the size is good, and now I continue. I'm gonna put the ring on the piston now. Carefully. Carefully. I don't think anybody's good at this. It's kind of hit and miss. Just kind of like, don't break, don't break. And it didn't break. Look at that. Okay, we're good. And I've removed the piston from the crank, for obvious reasons, right? So that it'll be much easier just to get it in the cylinder, and then I could reattach the crank pin, right? It's just sitting out like that. There are detents here which set the location. Let's see, there's one right there, detent right there, and detent right here. Gets them into position. Should be able to do this by hand, one at a time. Yep, there's the first one. I just want to get one in at a time, right, and then reevaluate the detent again. So now I'll get this detent in a position, right, and there's the second one. Okay, so now what I can do is I want to look at where the original scoring was from the earlier contamination and line that up to the position in the cylinder. So now I've aligned the piston just enough. We can see I've aligned the piston here in the bore, and I'm going to set it up now on the engine. We're going to connect it back to the crank. No, the gasket's already on. Thank you. The gasket's on. I'm going to set it back on the crank, push the crank pin through. I'm going to have to take the crank pin out, and then we'll get this back on the engine for completion. Right, Jason? It's about time.
What are you going to break today, Jordan?
What am I going to break? I think this is an unbreaking day, finally, personally. That should do it. I temporarily tied this cotter pin to the decompression valve. There's nothing to stop this from dropping into the engine if you push it through once this is tied down, so this is going to stop that from happening. I want to avoid that. That some good compression in the engine. Very nice. The important thing now is if we're getting vacuum now pulling on the intake, right? Let me flip this over. It'd be easier to turn, right? So we could see the rings I just put in right there. When it pulls back like that, and that's kind of hard to do because it's very little vacuum compared to, we're not going to know until, let's hook up the carburetor, get this thing spinning. I think we're ready to install it. Here, Frank.
Nice.
I found another manual for the 210, calls for a final torquing of the heads at 7 Newton meters. I'm happy to oblige, so I've set up my torque wrench accordingly, and we're gonna cross torque them for 7 Newton meters. And I'll revisit them one more time because it's aluminum. Make sure that there's still 7. There you go. I'm gonna call that torquing done. Moving on, putting this engine back in the bike. Here set up with the bike back on the bench, like the early videos. Got the carburetor dangles here, and the frame. 3 bolts hold this back into position. Probably gonna remove the spark plug just so I don't knock it into anything while I do this. That's enough just to hold it in position right now. How you doing, Roby? Doing it.
Okay, you don't got tonight.
All of the electrical wires are now reconnected. I just need to hook this back up to the frame when the gas tank goes back on. These cables are now all in place and ready for the ignition. There we go, ignition's connected. Now it's time to add the gas tank. should the fuel valve leak, I have an extra gasket for that fuel valve that I've purchased, so we'll find out. I guess the first thing we'll do is I'll turn on the fuel and make sure nothing's leaking. Oh wait, I gotta tighten down the banjo fitting. Okay, here goes everything. The fuel is filling up in the gas filter. Nothing's leaking. I'm gonna give it a little bit of time.
I heard it. Snap, crackle.
Before I forget, I'm gonna put some gear oil in this gearbox. I don't want to blow this thing up, so I'm gonna remove the top fill right here, and then there's a screw right here that sets the fill point. It's way longer than it needs to be. There it is. Outstanding.
I'm done.